Have you ever stood in front of someone whose presence seemed to drain the air from the room? Maybe it wasn't shouting or insults, just a subtle friction that made your chest tighten, your breath shorten, and your thoughts race. You tried to stay calm, but with each word exchanged, you could feel a fire building inside. Then, after walking away, the perfect response came to you, too late, echoing only in your mind. The Stoics knew this feeling well. They understood that our first reaction to a person is not always about them, it's the spark of our own nature colliding with theirs. That quick judgment, that silent sense of, I won't get along with this person, often rises before a single real conversation has begun. It's the mind preparing for a battle that may not even exist. When we let this reaction steer us, reason fades. We stop hearing clearly, we stop choosing wisely. And in that state, the smallest conflicts, at work, at home, anywhere, can cost us far more than we realize. Peace, trust, even the will to keep trying. We can't command the behavior of others, but we can decide how we meet them, whether we let them pull us into the storm or stand where the air is still. Stay with me, and we'll explore how to face difficult people in a way that leaves you untouched. 1. Escaping the label trap. Have you ever caught yourself silently giving someone a title in your mind before they've even finished their first sentence? Maybe it's the colleague who never looks up from their screen when you enter the room, fingers still moving over the keyboard as if your presence is an interruption to their private world. Or the person who, no matter what story you tell, must answer with one grander, brighter, or more dramatic. Then there's the one who drifts from desk to desk, sowing whispers and tension like a farmer scattering seed. And of course, the eternal pessimist, the one who remembers every past glory and every present flaw, and wears both like badges. We create these portraits so quickly. In Stoic terms, they are impressions, our mind's first sketches of others, drawn in the ink of habit and judgment. Marcus Aurelius warned, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." These labels may feel harmless, even useful, but they have a quiet power. They shape how we see, how we react, and how much of ourselves we give away. I once worked with a man everyone called the Stone Wall. He barely spoke in meetings, rarely smiled, and often seemed to ignore others entirely. The label fit so well that no one tried to know him beyond it. Months later, during an unexpected crisis, he was the first to step in with calm, decisive action. His quiet was not arrogance, but a deliberate choice to observe before speaking. That day, the stone wall became, in my mind, a fortress, steady, not cold. When we fix people into these mental archetypes, the not listener, the one-upper, the gossip, the curmudgeon, we trap ourselves as much as them. We allow their perceived faults to dictate our emotional state. We surrender our composure because of the shapes our thoughts have carved. Seneca reminded us that we suffer more in imagination than in reality. Every time we replay their offenses in our mind, we give them room in our inner court, where only reason should rule. The hard truth is this: we cannot rewire another's habits or dictate their conduct. The road to peace, the Stoics teach, is inward. If someone's inattentiveness sparks frustration or their arrogance provokes our pride, we can pause and ask, am I reacting to them or to the story I've told myself about them? This is not a call to tolerate harm, but a call to master the only realm we truly govern, our own response. In practical terms, this mastery means noticing when our body tightens, when words rise in our throat ready to clash, and choosing instead to steady the breath, to let the judgment pass without fastening it to the person. Just as a soldier polishes his armor daily so it's ready when the enemy appears, we can polish our discipline so we're ready when life sends us its difficult characters. I think of it as guarding the gates of the heart. The stress that floods in, what the ancients simply called turmoil, can corrode us from within if left unchecked. No workplace gossip, no arrogant neighbor, no dismissive friend is worth the slow poison of letting them rule our peace. Epictetus put it plainly. It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters. If their words, their silences, or their ways draw us into bitterness, the cost is ours to bear, and it is far too high. So why should we change ourselves because of someone else's conduct? Because the alternative is worse. To let them be the unseen hand that stirs our inner waters until they are always troubled. We do not yield for their sake, we adapt for our own. Not to please them, not to win them over, but to keep what is ours, clarity, dignity, and a mind unshaken. When we accept that the only behavior we can govern is our own, the conversation shifts. We no longer waste the hours wishing they were different. Instead, we ask, how can I move through this moment without letting it claim me? In this, we find the kind of strength the Stoics revered, not the strength that shouts, but the strength that stands, unbent by the winds of another's mood. And here's the quiet beauty in this shift. The archetypes begin to dissolve. The not listener becomes simply a person lost in their own thoughts. The one-upper, a soul seeking significance. The gossip, someone who mistakes noise for connection. The curmudgeon, a keeper of stories who fears they will be forgotten. We may still guard ourselves, but we do so without the weight of contempt. This is not softness, it is strategy. For every moment we spend resenting, we feed the very power we wish to weaken. Every time we choose composure over reaction, we reclaim a piece of that power. In the end, it's not about excusing them, it's about excusing ourselves from the cycle of disturbance they invite us into. So the next time you walk into a room and see the familiar faces of those who have tested you before, take note, the battle is not with them. It's with the urge to let them reach into the fortress of your mind. And that is a battle you can win before the first word is spoken. From here, we step into the next truth. Once we understand that we control our side of the exchange, we can begin to shape it in ways that not only protect our peace, but sometimes unexpectedly influence theirs. 2. Seeing through behavior. Have you ever noticed how easily we pass judgment when someone's behavior grates against us? A colleague stands their ground, and we call them stubborn. A stranger speaks with intensity, and we label them aggressive. Yet when a friend or ally does the very same thing, we find nobler words: steadfast, determined, passionate. Seneca once observed that we judge others by their actions, but ourselves by our intentions. The truth is, much of what we think about another person is colored by our own bias, and the label we attach says as much about us as it does about them. To see more clearly, we must step back and ask a question most people never pause to ask in the moment. Why did they act that way? Was it something born of their nature or a response to the circumstances before them? Often, we are too deep in our own irritation to ask, and so we condemn the person instead of understanding the act. But the Stoics would remind us that the first victory in any encounter is mastery over our own assumptions. I recall a time I was asked to help two managers in an organization, let us call them Bill and Ted, who could not agree on anything. Their conflict was no small matter. It had begun to cause real damage to projects and to the morale of their teams. Each saw the other not just as difficult, but as the main obstacle to progress. To understand the problem, I had each of them write down, without holding back, everything they thought and felt about the other. Bill's account painted Ted as a constant nuisance, always at his door, interrupting his work, never giving him a moment's peace. Ted's account was almost the mirror opposite. He explained that his own manager had sent him repeatedly to Bill to seek guidance because Bill's experience was invaluable to the organization. Yet whenever he approached, Bill seemed dismissive and cold. When I brought them together and allowed each to read the other's words, the effect was almost visible in the air between them. Bill saw, perhaps for the first time, that Ted's interruptions were not designed to frustrate him, but to seek help. Ted saw that his persistence, meant as diligence, was being read as intrusion. It was like turning a coin over and finally seeing both sides. The distance between them, built on months of silent judgment, began to close in that single conversation. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You always own the option of having no opinion. There is never any need to get worked up or to trouble your soul about things you can't control." Bill and Ted had both troubled their souls with imagined motives, never realizing that the truth was far simpler. Their conflict was not a clash of character so much as a clash of unspoken assumptions. This is why explaining behavior matters. Not explaining in the sense of excusing, but in the sense of understanding the terrain before choosing where to step. When we take the time to ask why, rather than leaping to a label, we open a path to solutions that labeling alone can never give us. Sometimes, as with Bill and Ted, it reveals that the problem is smaller than we thought. Sometimes it confirms that the behavior is indeed harmful, but it also gives us insight into how to respond without adding fuel to the fire. Of course, it is hardest to do this in the heat of the moment. The mind is quick to defend itself and slow to seek understanding when it feels wronged. But the discipline lies in pausing, if not in the moment, then as soon after as possible, to step outside your own view and consider another's. To look at the act, not just the actor, to separate the event from the judgment. I once heard a seasoned craftsman say that before he made the first cut of wood, he studied the grain. The grain told him how the wood would react, how it might split, how it might bend. To cut without seeing the grain would be to invite ruin. People are no different. If we move against them without first seeing their grain, the pattern of their behavior, the shape of their motives, we are far more likely to splinter the relationship beyond repair. When you explain behavior in this way, you are not simply gathering facts, you are reducing the grip of anger and uncertainty. You are giving yourself the chance to respond as you choose, not as your first impulse dictates. And you are laying the groundwork for the next step in dealing with difficult people, the ability to predict their behavior before it happens, so you can meet it without surprise or unnecessary strain. For once we have learned to see beyond the label, the path forward becomes clearer. We are no longer at the mercy of the story we tell ourselves about them. We are working with the reality of what is. And in that clarity, the difficult person loses much of the power we once thought they held over us. 3. Predict to stay calm. Have you ever felt that cold weight in your chest when someone in authority says, "Can you step into my office for a moment?" Rarely does the mind leap to good news. More often it races through imagined mistakes, past conversations, even trivial details, building a case against yourself before you've even stood up from your chair. This is the quiet poison of uncertainty. It unsettles the mind, tightens the body, and prepares us for blows that may never come. Marcus Aurelius understood this tendency well. He often reminded himself to meet the day knowing that obstacles would appear, that people might act in ways that would test him. By expecting the shape of the day, he took away the power of surprise, and with it, much of the fear. When we take the time to explain someone's behavior, we can begin to see its patterns. And once we see the patterns, we can predict what is likely to come next. This is not cynicism, it is preparation. The farmer does not resent the changing seasons. He studies them so he can plant at the right time and shelter his crops when storms roll in. In the same way, when we know that a certain colleague tends to interrupt, or that a friend will always add their own twist to our story, we can meet these moments without letting them pierce us. I once knew a manager who began every meeting with criticism, never a greeting, never a nod to what had gone well, only a brisk list of failures. The first time I encountered it, the words stuck with me for hours, coloring my work and my mood. But over time, I learned to expect it. I knew that after the first 5 minutes, the tone would soften and the rest of the meeting would be productive. By predicting this pattern, I stopped carrying the weight of those opening remarks into the rest of my day. It became like the chill of early morning. You notice it, but you don't mistake it for the whole day's weather. The Stoics saw this as a way to guard the mind. Seneca wrote, "He suffers more than necessary, who suffers before it is necessary." How much of our unrest comes not from the moment itself, but from the dread that precedes it? When we can say to ourselves, "I know how this person tends to act, and I am ready for it," we reduce the sting before it can land. We take away the element of shock that so often makes the wound deeper. Prediction does not make us cold. It frees us to respond with clarity. When you already expect that a friend will speak bluntly, you can listen for the truth in their words, instead of bristling at the tone. When you know a client tends to panic in crises, you can prepare calm reassurances before the crisis even begins. This readiness is not manipulation, it is stewardship of your own peace. I remember advising a young professional who dreaded her weekly one-on-one with her supervisor. She described it as walking into a storm. Together, we looked for patterns in her supervisor's questions, reactions, and timing. Soon she could anticipate the rhythm of these meetings, the early challenges, the midpoint discussion, the closing feedback. Once she could predict the flow, her anxiety eased. She stopped entering the room as if walking into battle and started coming in with the right answers ready, her composure intact. Within months, their working relationship improved, not because her supervisor had changed, but because she had stopped feeding her own dread. This is the power of prediction. It turns what once felt like a battlefield into familiar ground. And on familiar ground, the heart is steadier, the mind clearer. When the Stoics tell us to foresee every possible thing that can happen, they are not asking us to dwell on misfortune. They are asking us to be so prepared that misfortune finds no purchase in us. So when you know someone's habits, whether they are sharp-tongued, overly cautious, or prone to drama, remind yourself before you meet them, this is how they are. I will not be surprised. I will not be moved. And if they act differently, let it be a pleasant turn, not a necessary one. Carry this mindset into your next encounter. Expect the interruption. Expect the critique. Expect the exaggeration. Then, when it comes, let it pass over you like rain on a well-oiled cloak. You will find yourself less rattled, less reactive, and more in control of the only thing that matters, your own response. If you've ever experienced this shift, you know its value. If not, try it once. Before your next difficult conversation, take a moment to name what you expect from the other person. Hold that knowledge and walk in prepared. Then tell me in the comments, just 1 or 2 words, how it felt. And if these insights speak to you, subscribe so we can keep exploring the quiet strength the Stoics left us. Because once you have learned to predict without resentment, you have taken away one of the greatest weapons that difficult people hold over you. And from here we can move to something even more powerful, not just bracing for their behavior, but learning how to influence its direction without losing our own stillness. 4. Influence without forcing. Have you ever tried to tell someone exactly what they were doing wrong, only to watch their eyes narrow and their shoulders stiffen before the first sentence is finished? It's as if the words never landed, only the sting of accusation did. The Stoics understood that if you strike a man's pride head-on, he will shield himself before he hears the truth. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "If someone does wrong, instruct them kindly and show them the truth. But if you cannot, remember, your purpose is to be just." To influence a difficult person, you often must first remove the battle lines from the ground between you. One way to do this is to turn you into we. If I say, your behavior is causing problems, I have already drawn a border. They will defend their territory and, in turn, attack mine. But if I say, I've noticed we're having some trouble communicating, the ground shifts. Now it is shared soil, not a contested frontier. Communication, after all, is never one-sided. By speaking as though we are both in the same boat, we open the door for the other person to row with us instead of against us. I once saw this change the course of a working relationship that had been locked in quiet hostility. Two colleagues, often at odds, were forced to collaborate on a time-sensitive project. The first meeting began as usual, with thinly veiled jabs. But one of them broke the pattern, saying, "We seem to be speaking past each other. Let's figure out how to make sure we're both hearing the same thing." It was a small shift, yet the air softened. Over the next few days, the same we-framing turned confrontations into joint problem-solving. By the end of the project, they were not friends, but they were allies in a shared goal, and that was enough. Another path to influence is recognition. We like to imagine we are above such things, but even the most disciplined among us is moved when our effort is acknowledged. Seneca observed, "We are more often frightened than hurt, and we suffer more from imagination than from reality." The same applies to hostility. Sometimes the hostility we imagine from another person shrinks when they show us an unexpected kindness. If someone known for being cold or combative delivers work that is thoughtful or precise, taking a moment to acknowledge it can alter the dynamic. It is not flattery, it is the simple recognition of value where it appears. I remember a man whose reputation in the office was one of relentless criticism. Most avoided him, bracing for disapproval. One day, after he presented a report that was both thorough and concise, a colleague, who had every reason to dislike him, said, "That was an excellent breakdown." It made the next steps much clearer. The man's expression shifted in a way few had seen. Over time, such acknowledgments from various people seemed to dull the edges of his manner. He didn't become gentle overnight, but he became easier to work with. And, in many cases, that's enough. This approach requires setting aside the need to win every encounter. It demands a certain humility, the kind Epictetus spoke of when he said, "It is not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters." To influence is not to control another's nature. It is to plant seeds in the soil you share and tend them with patience. Recognition, inclusive language, and small gestures of goodwill are not concessions of defeat. They are tools of the wise who know that a softer touch can redirect a harder stone. There is also the deeper truth that each of us is someone else's difficult person. It is easy to see the sharp edges in others, harder to see the ones we cast ourselves. Until we recognize this, our attempts to influence others will always be clouded by the belief that the work lies only on their side. Influence begins with awareness of our tone, our choice of words, our timing. The more we control these, the more room we give for another person to meet us in a calmer space. So the next time you face someone whose behavior feels immovable, ask yourself, can I speak in a way that places us on the same side of the table? Can I find something, however small, to acknowledge as worthy? Influence is not about turning an enemy into a friend overnight. It is about making it harder for them to keep seeing you as the enemy. And once we learn to guide the currents between ourselves and others, the final step is the hardest of all, taking full command of our own vessel, regardless of how turbulent their waters remain. 5. Steady in heated moments. There are moments when another person's words or actions can make your body react before your mind has even decided how it feels. The heart quickens, the breath shortens, muscles tighten, as if an invisible signal has sounded the alarm. To your body, it is no different than standing before a charging lion. The Stoics understood this primitive surge well, even if they did not name it as we do today. Epictetus warned, "It is not things themselves that disturb us, but our judgments about them." And in those first few seconds, our judgment is often clouded by the body's instinct to either fight or flee. To master ourselves in such moments, we must signal to both body and mind that there is no real lion here, only words, only a situation that will pass. Something as simple as a deliberate deep breath can serve as that signal. It is not a trick or a polite pause. It is a command to the inner citadel to hold its ground. When you fill your lungs slowly and release the air with control, you are telling yourself, I am safe enough to breathe this way. I am safe enough to choose. That single breath can be the space in which wisdom slips between impulse and action. I remember a meeting in which two colleagues, both intelligent and competent, let their disagreements swell into something sharper. The pace of their words quickened, their voices rose, and you could feel the tension gathering in the room like a storm. One of them, unexpectedly, stopped, leaned back, and inhaled deeply, then said, "I think we're both getting carried away here. Why don't we pause for a few minutes and come back to this?" It was not surrender. It was a reclaiming of the ground beneath his feet. The conversation, when it resumed, was calmer, more focused, and no one had to raise their voice again. Counting to 10 is another way to create this pause, though not in the mechanical sense of reciting numbers while anger simmers untouched. It is not about standing there muttering 1, 2, 3 through clenched teeth. The count is a ritual, a moment to step outside the fire and look back at it. You might frame it aloud in inclusive terms. We're both passionate about this. Let's take a moment to step back and reset. By speaking this way, you not only calm yourself, you invite the other person into the calm with you. In the Stoic view, this is an act of leadership because you are guiding the tone of the encounter rather than being swept along by it. Marcus Aurelius often reminded himself that the mind is unconquerable if it refuses to consent to disturbance. He wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." Pausing, whether by breath or by count, is how we exercise that power. It is a refusal to let the rush of blood and the tightening of muscle dictate our words. There is a quiet discipline in doing this. It feels unnatural at first because the body believes that speed will keep us safe. But in conversation, speed often serves the ego more than the truth. When we slow down, we choose our words with care. We notice whether the other person's tone is softening or hardening. we see openings for understanding that we might have missed in haste. In this way, the pause is not a retreat. It is the sharpening of the blade before the next stroke. I recall another instance, this time outside of work. A friend, clearly upset, began speaking to me with clipped, impatient tones over a misunderstanding. My first impulse was to match his pace, to fire back with my own version of events. Instead, I took a breath and said, "It sounds like this matters to you. Let's slow down so I can really hear you." His shoulders eased, and though we still disagreed, the conversation unfolded without the fractures that come when pride takes the lead. Breathing deeply, counting, pausing, these are simple acts, but they are not small. They are the means by which we prevent a moment's heat from burning the bridge we may still need to cross tomorrow. They remind us that even when another person seems impossible, we can remain the master of our own vessel. And here lies the deeper lesson. The measure of a person is not taken when the seas are calm, but when the winds rise and the waves pound. In those moments, the Stoic does not grip the wheel harder out of fear. He steadies his hands and adjusts the sail. This is what the breath, the count, the pause truly are, adjustments of the sail in the middle of a storm. So the next time someone's words strike you like an unexpected blow, remember, the lion is only in your mind. Step back, breathe, count. Invite the other person, if they will, into that stillness with you, and if they will not, keep it for yourself. For in the stillness you will find the clarity to choose your next move, not as a prisoner of instinct, but as a keeper of your own reason. From here, the journey turns inward even further to the final step. Not just managing the moment, but shaping the way we live so that no difficult person, no matter how relentless, can pull us from the path we have chosen. 6. Separate person from action. There are days when we look at a person and think they are impossible. Their presence feels like a weight, their words cut, or their silence freezes. And so, without much thought, we give them a label: difficult, toxic, bad. The Stoics would caution us here. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "When you meet someone, ask yourself first, what is their nature and what is mine?" To see clearly, we must separate the human from the action. It is not the entire person who is unbearable. It is a behavior, a choice, a moment in which they fall short. When we make this separation, the label moves from the person to the act, and the person themselves remains, as we all are, capable of better. This distinction matters because it gives us room to decide whether the behavior is truly worth the battle. Is this the hill we want to die on? Is this worth the tightening in the chest, the sleepless night, the energy we could have given to something that nourishes us? If the answer is no, and most often it is, then wisdom lies in letting go, not in proving ourselves right. I once worked alongside a man who was infamous in the office for interrupting. Meetings became a race to speak before he cut in, and his habit was the source of endless complaints. It was easy to say, he is arrogant. But in a quieter moment, I learned that he had grown up in a household where speaking quickly and loudly was the only way to be heard. The habit was born of survival, not malice. Once I saw that, I could address the behavior, asking for pauses, agreeing on speaking turns without condemning the man. The tension between us dissolved enough for real work to happen. This is the essence of the model we have been exploring. We begin by explaining the behavior, asking why it happens, looking beyond the surface offense. Then we predict, reducing the uncertainty that breeds anxiety. We learn how to influence, shaping the tone and direction of the exchange with inclusive language and honest recognition. We control ourselves, breathing, pausing, refusing to be ruled by impulse. And we end here, at the point where all of these threads meet. The choice to focus on our own conduct, regardless of theirs. Why should we have to be the ones to change? The Stoics would answer plainly, because the alternative is to surrender our peace to someone else's flaws. Seneca said, "No man has the power to have everything he wants, but it is in his power not to want what he has not." We cannot make another person kinder, calmer, or wiser by force, but we can become less dependent on their change for our own steadiness. Relationships, whether in the workplace, in our families, or in the wider world, are living things. They either grow or decay depending on how they are tended. If we withdraw into resentment, they wither. If we meet every slight with retaliation, they rot. But if we engage with care, even when care is not returned, we give them a chance to survive, and sometimes, against the odds, to thrive. The truth is, conflict has a cost that outlasts the moment. It leaves marks on our bodies in the form of tension and illness. It leaves marks on our work, our creativity, our trust in others. Every time we carry anger home, every time we replay an argument instead of sleeping, we pay with hours of our life that will not return. To change our own approach is not to let others win, it is to refuse to keep paying that price. I think of it as tending a fire. A difficult person throws a spark in our direction. We can let it catch, feeding it with our outrage until it becomes a blaze that scorches everything around us. Or we can stamp it out before it grows, not because the spark was harmless, but because the fire it would create is not worth the warmth it might bring. We choose where our strength is spent. So, when you meet someone who provokes you, pause. Ask yourself, am I judging the whole person for the sake of one act? Can I address the act without poisoning the relationship? Can I walk away from this moment without carrying it into the rest of my day? If you can answer yes, you have already won more than any sharp retort could give you. In the end, the measure of dealing with difficult people is not how many you have corrected or outmaneuvered. It is how often you have remained yourself, calm, clear, and unshaken while in their presence. That is the quiet victory the Stoics prized above all. And so, we return to the question we began with. Why change ourselves? Because peace, once lost, is harder to regain than it is to protect. Because our days are too short to spend in battles that leave no one better. Because, as Epictetus taught, freedom is the only worthy goal in life. It is won by disregarding things that lie beyond our control. The behavior of others lies beyond our control. Our own behavior does not. Guard it. Shape it. Let it be the example that outlasts the irritation of the moment. For when you stand steady in the face of difficulty, you are not only protecting your own heart, you are showing the world, and perhaps even the other person, that there is another way to live. And that, more than any victory in argument or display of force, is how you truly outsmart the difficult people you meet. Your peace is your most valuable possession, and no one's careless words or reckless actions deserve the power to take it from you. Protect it as you would your health, because carrying their anger in your chest is a burden you do not need to bear. Choose composure over reaction, clarity over chaos, and you will always stand in the stronger place. If this message spoke to you, subscribe so we can continue exploring the timeless strength of Stoic wisdom together. Share your thoughts in the comments with just 2 words. Stay calm. Remember, every encounter is a chance to practice the discipline that makes you unshakable. In the next video, we will take this even further and uncover how to turn the most challenging people into silent teachers for your own growth.